Well, every Claude Pepper dinner has keynote speakers, and tonight we have author James Clarke. Dr. Clarke has a long career in journalism and is on the faculty of UCF teaching history. His latest two books, which we might all be interested in because we're Floridians, one is Presidents in Florida, a history of how U.S. presidents have changed the history of Florida. And the second is Red Pepper and Gorgeous George. Great title, by the way. Red Pepper and Gorgeous George. It's a wonderful account of how Claude Pepper was defeated by George Smathers in 1950 in a very contentious election. Contentious elections are nothing new, you know. They had them in 1950, and that was a real doozy. It sounds really good, and he's here to speak about it, so let's welcome Dr. Jim Clarke. Thank you. I'm standing on it.
Why are you doing that? Thank you very much. This is a beautiful hotel, and you really have to give Nancy credit over here that after scouring all of Lake County, she came up with the only building in Lake County dedicated by a Republican president. And she wasn't finished yet. I am spending tonight in the President Calvin Coolidge room, and actually it's kind of a neat room because it has a copy of his check-in, you know, where he signed in back in 1929 as a guest, and it also has a copy of his White House portrait. And frankly, I don't know why, I'd never seen a color portrait of Calvin Coolidge. They're all black and whites, and I did not realize he had red hair. And so I always thought Thomas Jefferson was the only redheaded presidency, but now Calvin and I will be spending the night together. And so congratulations, Nancy, on finding this wonderful hotel. Just a quick personal story, because I thought about it. Actually, it ruined my evening when the entertainer was talking about Romney's real first name being Mittens. My dad went to Washington in the late 30s. He was working for the government. He was a road builder, nothing fancy, and he found this diner in Washington. And in this diner, the guy served great chili. And so my dad would eat 3 meals a day at this diner. And he and the owner of the diner became friends, and they would talk, and the owner of the diner would talk about his dreams, and my dad would talk about, you know, hey, what they want to do after the Depression was over, and this guy who ran the diner said that he wanted to open a hotel. And my dad thought that was the stupidest idea in the world, and he told him, he said, that's stupid. He said, stick to the chili, stick to the chili. As late as, it's true, the 1970s, my dad was telling this man, forget the hotels, stick with the chili. Fortunately, J. Willard Marriott did not listen to my father, wait a minute, and did not invest in Marriott hotels. The person who did invest in Marriott hotels was named George Romney, who named his son Willard Romney, after J. Willard Marriott, and that's Mitt Romney's real first name was Willard, and frankly, if my dad had bought stock, I would have been willing to be called Willard for all my life. This hotel is magnificent. Opened in 1883, and as I say, Calvin Coolidge spent a month here. And a lot of great history attached to it. Oh, by the way, to show you how the world has changed, a couple things I was thinking about sitting there. Well, first of all, 50 years ago, George Romney, Mitt's dad, was president of American Motors. And he turned down, they had a profitable year, which was amazing for American Motors, but he turned down a $100,000 bonus from the board, saying that he did not think the presidents of companies should make that much more than the employees. I don't think Mitt has done that yet. I was talking to my good friend Jerry and thinking back, Jerry Deming, the sheriff of Orange County. 50 years ago, the sheriff of Orange County was a Klansman, one of the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan. And today we have an African-American sheriff in Orange County. Although, Jerry, there is kind of a perverse efficiency when you're able to commit the crime, take the report, and close it all in 24 hours. You know, so maybe there's something to that. I've been following Jerry and Val Deming's careers. I can tell you that they have devoted their lives to giving me parking tickets. When this is true, you can ask them. When Jerry first started in law enforcement, parking tickets were $2 in Orlando. And when Val stepped down as police chief, they were $28. Right? Yeah. We are in an election year. If you think that this state is not important to the Republicans, speaking of my old friend Calvin Coolidge, Calvin was the last Republican elected president without carrying Florida, almost 100 years ago. Also about the same time, 1920s, Central Florida elected a woman congressman. Very unusual. Women had just gotten the right to vote a few years earlier. So I think it's not out of line once every century to have a female congresswoman. We won't be electing a governor this year. Again, up until about 50 years ago, we would have been electing a governor this year. But in the mid-60s, the Democrats who controlled the legislature had a bright idea. Their idea was to move the gubernatorial election. They were afraid that that Republican presidential candidates like Eisenhower and even Nixon in '60 would sweep the state and sweep Republican gubernatorial candidates into office. So they voted to move the election to keep Republicans from winning statewide office. And you can see how well that's worked out. And we have produced some unusual politicians. For those of you who are down on Rick Scott, please remember Sidney J. Katz, a governor around World War I who ran on a platform that Catholics were preparing to overthrow the state government and promised that if elected, he would have National Guardsmen search all convents for weapons. Bill Nelson holds a seat occupied by a guy named Charlie Jones in the late 1800s. Charlie served 2 terms, and then halfway, not even halfway through his second term, fell in love with a woman from Detroit, moved to Detroit, never returned to Washington or to Florida. Spent 4 years trying to get this woman to date him. She wouldn't. And they sent his checks to Detroit. After his term ended, he was committed to a mental hospital. So this strikes me as strange. Florida is the largest state in the union to never have a president or vice president, or a presidential or vice presidential nominee. almost everybody's had a president or vice president except for us. Even in the cabinet, we're one of the lowest ranking states. We've had 3 cabinet members in 170 years. Some thought that might change today, that Senator Rubio might be selected, and of course he was not. The last time a member of the House of Representatives was selected was William Miller. Anybody remember William Miller? Yes. That tells me 2 things about you. You're old and you're spending entirely too much time reading about politics. William Miller was Barry Goldwater's running mate in 1964, and again, you know how well that turned out. So House members generally do not help presidential candidates. So it'll be interesting to see what happened. Also in the 60s, the other thing I remember how old I am, when the gentleman playing Barack Obama was up here, I was thinking that the first one of these I saw was a guy who looked like Lyndon Johnson doing Johnson imitations back in the 60s at a dinner like this. While presidents have not come from Florida, they have come here for fun. Chester A. Arthur was the first president to visit here, easily forgettable. He went fishing in Orange County. Presidents of the United States could not go south of Orange County because the telegraph line ended there into the 1890s. There was nothing, remember, Miami wasn't founded until 1896. So he found this place and he said it was the greatest fishing in the world and he loved it. A place called Reedy Creek. What's amazing, of course, and some of you know this, that 80 years later, Walt Disney would come to the exact same spot and buy the land for Disney World. Just real coincidence. Richard Nixon, of course, had a house in Key Biscayne. Great story about George Smathers, the senator. After Nixon was elected, you may remember he ran on a unity platform, bring us together. And after he won, there was a rumor he'd name a Democrat to his cabinet. And who better than his old friend, George Smathers, the outgoing senator from Florida. And so the rumor spread that Smathers was about to be named Attorney General of the United States. Wow. Sure enough, the phone call came. President-elect Nixon's office. The president-elect wanted to speak to Senator Smathers about a vital matter and ask him for a favor. Would he be available the next morning? Yes, said Senator Smathers. He would be. And the next morning, the phone rang. It was Richard Nixon. He said, George, I want to ask you an important favor. Your country needs you. This was it. Nixon said, George, would you sell me your house in Key Biscayne? Smathers, of course, said yes, and that ended up as the Key Biscayne White House all those years, where Richard Nixon was staying during the Watergate break-in.